Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy. Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
Following program are pre-recorded.
Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270, you're tuned to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Beigel, along with my co-host Jason Spees from This Week in Energy. You can catch This Week in Energy and The Crude Life Sunday mornings 10 a.m. right here on Super Talk 1270. Well, Jason, a lot filling in thank you for filling in for me on Monday for part of the show with Lori Hintz from Beck News. And since then, of course, we use that segment every week as an update of what's going on with Summit Carbon Solutions' proposed CO2 pipeline. But a lot of breaking news since then. I'm sure you had an opportunity to talk a little bit about the Friends of Ag and Energy Ponzi scheme, I guess I'll call it that. The fleecing of taxpayers in North Dakota, I'll call it that too. Lining pockets for personal, I'll call it that as well. So they had lined up some meetings with legislators and this is the part that really kind of gets under my skin, is to educate legislators so they can educate their constituents to the wonders of Summit Carbon Solution and CO2 sequestration. Okay, well, it seems there's been a little bit of pressure, a little backlash on that, and some questions concerned whether the ethics around that, not being public or open meetings. The media originally wasn't even allowed. It was kind of a closed door session. Brought up a lot of questions. It just, and lack of transparency. I'm glad to see North Dakotans push back and said, wait a minute, you're not doing any of this crap behind closed doors. That's how we got to where we're at. And now it's my understanding those meetings have been either canceled or postponed.
They have been, and it's been a very interesting just set of circumstances after another to watch unfold, because Steve, you know this, that, for me, part of it is, behind the scenes, some of due diligence gathering, doing some assistance on some areas. A lot of this is reporting. And what's very interesting in this whole deal is, from a reporter's standpoint, or somebody trained to go gather news, or somebody who's worked for a media outlet, and somebody who's won awards, by the way, and newspaper, radio, and magazines. So I've won awards in 3 different industries for my news nose, if you will. And there's so many different angles to this, but one of the stories that is left untold is how the landowners are having to rely on independent media, because so much of the media has been very much one-sided. And they've been giving one side the benefit of the doubt. Well, now we're finding out what the repercussions are. There's so much coming out now. Words like toxic are being used. What's behind the curtain of Oz? Ethics reports are being filed. Freedom of Information Acts are being done. Counties are passing laws to have companies investigated due to this. This is going to be the story of the decade, Steve. This is as big as Dabble. This is as big as Medina, Gordon Call. That's how big this is. There's a generational story that comes out of North Dakota every 10 years. 10 to 15 years. And this carbon pipeline is now it. So Governor Burgum, he's going to have his legacy attached to this. Harold Hamm could have all of his oil and gas philanthropy wiped out by this pipeline. Gary Tharaldson is attached to this pipeline. I heard rumors he was trying to back away. I mean, not the Tharaldson ethanol, but Gary. And I don't know if it's true or not, but as soon as I heard it, I believed it, Steve, because I don't know about in Bismarck, but in Fargo, it's becoming a hot topic.
Well, and I'll throw another name in there, Kathy Nessett as well, who was the first lady of the Bakken. And it then has gotten into some wind and some now carbon sequestration ventures. And you bring up an interesting point when you start talking about what your legacy looks like and what do you want to be remembered for. In Governor Burgum's case, I guess, is this better or worse than having the only legacy as your stint as governor, the term governor casual, which that's the only thing that you've really left an indelible mark on the state with, is the fact that you don't wear dress clothes in the legislature. I mean, I don't know where to go with this because some of this is so asinine, you cannot make this up. I mean, it is a made-for-TV movie that at some point it has to be made. Now, my question is, because going back a little bit to put a little stamp on this, when are the power brokers in North Dakota going to wake up and start stepping away from the same toxic individuals that are doing things for lining their own pockets and not the benefit of North Dakota? And Scott Hennon's a great example. I've known Scott since the late 80s. And Scott has been about Scott, and Scott has done the same type of business for decades now. Anything he touches turns to crap. And there's a reason for that. But yet people keep going back to the well. You have to at some point go, okay, what's the common denominator?
Well, the one thing that I've noticed, Steve, you mentioned Kathy Nessett, okay? And you mentioned Scott Hennon. Now, I've been told that they're business partners on a media outlet or some different business endeavors.
Scott's Flag Family Ventures, and there's a reason that Scott had his fingers into 1460 in Tioga. Either way, I've into some print pieces.
I've heard this from probably 4 or 5 different media sources and respectable sources that Kathy Nessett and Scott Hennon are business partners in media endeavors, which are promoting the oil and gas industry and now agriculture and carbon. But before then, it was just the oil and gas industry. So right there, that says a lot. Okay. So when you have Kathy Nessett and Scott Hennon as business partners, well, now they're tied together. They're tied together. So just like you have, well, I'll give you another example here of this leadership. Okay. So I've even heard from, North Dakota Petroleum Council, Ron Ness, that he's got ownership in different projects around the region. And he sits on committees that he can direct dollars directly to those projects. Now, when you have power like that, like Kathy Nessett, Scott Hennon, and Ron Ness, to direct the amount of government money anytime you want without question. And if anybody questions you, you can just call them crazy. You can just call them a liar. You can just dismiss them and do the easy thing like they've done to me for years, because it's easy for them to do that because they're in a position of power. So when Scott Hennon, Ron Ness, and Kathy Nessett decide to abuse their power, well, a lot of people don't understand that they're doing that. But when you're on the receiving end of it, well, you understand wholeheartedly. Now, let's give you an example here.
Tell you what,
We'll
hold on to that example. We're up against a break.
Okay.
Hold on to that example. I want to come back and finish up this thought line, because then I want to start tying in different layers to this.
Well, we're
Because
going
this
to
is
tie
just
in the
one more
toxic
example.
nonprofits. Let's tie in the toxic nonprofits
But
that
I want
Ron
to tie
Ness,
in
Scott
commerce
Hennon, and Kathy Hennon are.
and commerce and the governor's office and all of this. I want to tie all this together. You're tuned to Talk of the Town. This is Steve Bakken along with Jason Spees. You can catch Jason with This Week in Energy Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. right here on Super Talk 1270.
At 8. Super Talk.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270. I'm Steve Bakken along with Jason Spees, my co-host on Wattage Wednesday on Super Talk 1270. And Jason, of course, you can catch him with This Week in Energy on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. right here on Super Talk 1270. All right, Jason, we were getting into some of these examples, and I sorry to cut you off as we're heading into the break. But
that's okay. So we'll just go back, the last 15 years. How many different opportunities to make money supporting the energy industry has Ron Ness given you, Steve? And you've been in the media for 15 years. How many opportunities? He's given me zero.
Yeah, no, I gained nothing from, when I was working on a different station for a different company and doing a rather extensive energy program. That was, no support, none.
Right. Okay. In fact, I would even go as far to say that in my instance, and I can speak on your behalf because I believe that he positioned people to take your opportunities away from you, much like he funded individuals and nonprofits to take opportunity away from me. So not only does Ron Ness not support people supporting the industry, he actually creates competition with government money and takes opportunity away. And Kathy Nessett and Scott Hennon are the beneficiaries of that as well. So when they join forces and then go on a very large radio station with a very large FCC license, which garners big dollars because of a powerhouse corporation with a corporate buying department, well, there's some interesting conflicts of interest there in the old world. In the new North Dakota, there's not. In the new North Dakota, conflicts of interest don't exist at all, unless they decide it. They don't. You're gaining too much momentum, and Doug Burgum doesn't like it. So the conflict of interest, he wants your business. That type of thing. Because like I said, you can sit on board of directors for the state of committees where you actually benefit from voting on dollars going directly to your companies. Okay, so they don't call that a conflict of interest anymore. They don't call North Dakota Commerce giving money to Doug Burgum's family a conflict of interest at all. The old world used to, but not the new world. So getting into my example of the large media outfit being funded by the North Dakota Petroleum Council. So after Scott Hennon got basically kicked off the air. And by the way, that's a repeating pattern because he's very dividing with his discourse. His programming is very polarizing, and it's been that way since day one. So this is not new. So if you're part of the North Dakota leadership and you continue to enable and endorse this, well, the rest of the world is looking at you now. Kathy Nessett, the rest of the world is looking at you now because you are now toxic. Ron Ness, the rest of the world is looking at you now because you are now toxic. Harold Hamm, the world is looking at you now and you are now toxic. That's how it works. And so what do? They go grab somebody who has zero experience. They don't call you. They don't call me. They don't call the other professionals in the state. No, they need someone they can control. This is called another non non-profit toxic known as an industry plant, Steve. This is where you actually, I forget the guy's name, is Jessica Biel's husband. She's a lobbyist.
Yeah.
She used to be a former legislator. He gets a prime spot. You know what? There's not one person in the state of North Dakota that can tell you they listened to his show at one time because he never had one. How do you go from being a nobody to getting one of the top radio shows in the state? You know how? Ron Ness, Harold Hamm decide that's where you're going to go. That's called a plant. That is an industry plant. And that's how things become toxic, is because you lose the trust of the people by wasting their money, by spending their money, and by trying to manipulate them with their own money. Jeff Magrum talks about it all the time, Steve. He says that we're funding our own rope to hang us. And that's what he's talking about. That's exactly what he's talking about. So boy, you know, they call Scott Hennon coin slot Scott, but somebody put a quarter in me this morning.
Apparently. You know what? I want to talk about that toxic environment because, you know, how long does this go back? Because, you know, I point fingers at a lot of what's going on right now to the governor's office and how Commerce has been tasked with giving away our tax dollars. They tapped into the legacy fund, or the governor's office tapped into the legacy fund. The governor's office has facilitated Mr. Wonderful to get free millions and millions of dollars. And those are taxpayer dollars. What benefit for North Dakota and for North Dakotans? There seems to be this group that is the beneficiary of North Dakota's hard work. And how far do you think that goes back? Because I point a lot of things taken to that next level on the back of the governor and that power structure. But it really goes back a lot further than that, doesn't it? It's just
I think different... I mean, you've got kind of a double-headed pyramid, if you will. So you have Burgum, who figured out what Senator Hoeven is doing. You know, it's the Senator Hoeven model. You know, I mean, take a look at the Public Service Commission, take a look at Commerce, take a look at Tax Commission, take a look at Insurance Commission, all these different Republican-run offices. Many times they'll step down a year before the election, and then they'll get to appoint the person. Well, in the United States, you have a 93% chance of winning if you're the incumbent. And if you're a Republican in North Dakota, you have even more of a chance. So that was part of the strategy. And what's happening is that, you know, Senator Hoeven and, you know, even Pat Finken and Ron Rauschenberger, his pit bulls that have done all the dirty work behind the scenes, you know, the Rumsfelds of the state, they kind of were the Rumsfeld in the Dick Cheney. They created a lot of public-private partnerships behind the scenes. You know, Senator Hoeven is the only Republican senator that put his stocks on a secret offshore account, so there was no transparency in 2019 before the Stocks Act went public. Pete, that really didn't get reported much in the state. Senator Hoeven, the only Republican senator that decided he didn't want to be transparent with how much stocks he owns. You know, people forget how much pharmaceuticals he owns. You know, so Hoeven, when you take a look at it, he's in control of the one faction of the Republican Party. And then you take a look at the other one, and it's Burgum. Burgum was a Democrat. Burgum saw the template and the formula being used by the Republican Party, being run and dictated by Hoeven and Pat Finken and Ron Rauschenberger. And Burgum, funded by Bill Gates, went and got his hippie VW bus and turned into a Republican. Did it Ed Schultz? Ed Schultz said, hey, there's more money to be made as a Democrat than a Republican, so he switched sides. So did Burgum.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know this. Ed Schultz, who was on the air for many, many decades in North Dakota, Ed was a Republican. He really was.
Ed was a Republican even when he was a Democrat. And, you know,
he just figured out where to make money.
Well, he just figured out you focus on the social issue, and then you're a Democrat, but you can still behind the scenes be a businessman. And so Ed was a very, I'd love to. I actually think North Dakota should do a documentary on Ed Schultz. He has one of the most interesting lives of any person to ever enter this state. From the rumors of, the whiskey bottle being thrown at him at the Bison games to people forget this, that Ed Schultz was the Rush Limbaugh of the Democratic Party. And then they pushed him aside and gave it to Al Franken. So Ed Schultz did all the hard work and got that Alan Combs reject show that the Democrats tried to put out, and he turned it into a success. And then they pushed him aside and gave it to Al Franken the year before he ran for Minnesota Senate. But Ed went to MSNBC at that time. So anyway, we could talk about Ed for a long time, and I don't even remember how we got off on Ed on that. But about switching sides, yeah. So Burgum, that's what he did. He was a Democrat that was a Silicon Valley businessman, and all he did was decided he could be better off as a Republican. Remember, because he disrupted the Republican Party. Wayne Stenhjem was supposed to be it. He was supposed to be the governor. And
actually, if you go back, Drew Wrigley was supposed to be the governor with Julie Fedorchak, his lieutenant governor, and personal issues screwed up the Hoeven, well, what a lot of people refer to as the Hoeven secession plan. And actually, Rick Becker had a chance in 2016 to be the governor, but was out-politicked by Burgum and Burgum's secession plan. So fascinating stuff. We'll come back and talk more of this. We're up against a break. This is Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Bakken along with Jason Spiess from the Crude Life on Super Talk 1270.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
Without apology, The Regular Joe Show with Joe Gigante. Weekday evenings at 9 on Super Talk 1270 and the free Super Talk 1270 mobile app. Welcome back to Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270. I'm Steve Bakken along with Jason Spiess from the Crude Life. You can catch a Crude Life Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. as part of This Week in Energy right here on Super Talk 1270. And we're talking about the politics kind of behind Summit Carbon Solutions' proposed CO2 pipeline. Of course, the big news taking place yesterday that the Friends of Ag and Energy what started out as closed-door education camps for our legislators so that they could educate their constituents about the virtues of carbon sequestration have been canceled or postponed, or they've been pushed off. And a lot of reasons why. We'll maybe get into those in a little bit, but we're talking about where all this started. And you really got to go back to the history of the last several governors in North Dakota. Now, things changed a little bit in North Dakota under Ed Schaefer. Ed brought in, I like to call it the North Dakota work ethic entrepreneurialism, where it's you roll your sleeves up, work hard, and you get ahead. And you got to remember, you have to put things in context when you talk about them. So at the time, Ed Schaefer was elected governor and made some big changes and moved North Dakota in a little bit of a different direction. And where we were from an economic perspective at that time, this is before oil. This is before the Bakken boom. We hung our hat a lot on agriculture, but we were also an exporter of a lot of commodities, the number one commodity being our people, our kids, our population. Ed rolled his sleeves up and went to work about trying to keep North Dakota kids in North Dakota and trying to grow the state. Did a very good job starting that path. And then came Governor Hoeven and then Governor Dalrymple, and then where we are today with Governor Burgum. So if you go back to 2016, though, Jason, what is known as the Hoeven secession plan, it was supposed to be Drew Wrigley and Julie Fedorchak. That's who was supposed to be sitting in the governor's office at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I always heard too. And Drew Wrigley, of course, he's very surprising when he was announced as the replacement attorney general. To be honest, it said a lot to me because, and this is me just editorializing, and I'm a cancer survivor, stage 4, stage 2, stage 0. My mom died of cancer. My dad got remarried 3 months after my mom died, so he was dating while my mom was on her deathbed. So when the news came out that, Attorney General Drew Wrigley was cheating on his wife when she was going through cancer, it was a little personal to me for a variety of reasons, from my family and from me personally. And I understand the amount of ethics involved with the whole scenario. And so to me, the way the state just dismisses that, like, no big deal, it's a little offensive. And furthermore, the way the Ethics Commission is set up and the way that a lot of the laws are changing, it's interesting because Drew Wrigley is really in charge of a lot of people's ethics now. That's one of the reasons why I found it so interesting. Doug Burgum, when he ran for president, didn't mention the word God one time, but he mentioned the word environment a dozen. And we're going into a world where the government is in control of our environment. So does that mean the government is now going to be in charge of our emotional and spiritual as well? Because I don't know about you, Steve, but I don't want Drew Wrigley in charge of mine. But getting back to, Hovind's succession plan of Fedorchak and Wrigley, you could argue that they knew about this carbon storage in Fedorchak's property 15, 20 years ago, because they've been working on carbon capture for a long time. So I'm very certain they knew about the geology. They know where every drop of oil in the Bakken is. So I'm pretty sure they know where all the carbon storage is because it's been going on for over 20 years. And when I take a look at the different years, you were right. And you had a very good synopsis of Governor Ed Schaefer bringing in kind of that Mr. Bubbles work ethic, man, the old school American, pull your bootstraps up. Let's go on and be the door-to-door salesman and cold leads and the whole deal, because we're going to put that mousetrap out in the free market and see what happens. That's what I went to high school under Ed Schaefer with. Hovind was different. Hovind was a lot to me like George Bush, where his idea of a Republican was not the same as mine. And when Hovind was done, he grew North Dakota's government more than anybody, more than any Democrat. So you could argue Hovind was just as much of a Democrat as Doug Burgum, because Doug Burgum has grown the government immensely too. So I want
to come back to that too, because our next segment, I want to bring commerce into this. But you're right.
We're getting there.
You look at the growth of government, and that was kind of my point going back to Ed. And Ed was at the point where North Dakota had to grow a little bit because you needed to supply some services because we're losing population. And if you're going to start
by the way, Steve, that happened under Hovind too, but it happened under research. Well, we'll come back and talk about that.
But it happened entirely differently as well. So under Hovind, you start growing government. And it was growing government for the sake of growing government. I used to make the joke, and I think I mentioned it before on this program, that, North Dakota is going to have the lowest unemployment in the country. We're all going to work for the state.
Hovind used universities, whereas Burgum's using state departments.
And the history of that goes back because you take a look at the growth of UND, NDSU, Dickinson, Minot, and the schools across the state.
What's the EERC? Is that a public place? Is that a private place? It's on campus.
Supposed to be private.
But is it really part of campus? But it's on campus. What is it, Steve?
It started out as a federal agency nestled at the University of North Dakota, and when that agency dried up, the state of North Dakota and the University of North Dakota saw some value there. So it was facilitated to be floated by the University of North Dakota until they could get their feet under them and then go out and be a private entity, go out and generate your own revenue. And they've done that. Now, I would, at one point, excuse me, depending on who you talk to, 65% of all energy innovation globally came out of Grand Forks, North Dakota with the EERC. That's changed.
Well, we better hit a quick break here, man, before you cough up a lung and we before Randy has a heart attack with our,
I swear to God, we did not
break
mention we did not mention the Clintons. I swear. We're up against a break anyway, so we'll come back and finish that commerce conversation. This is Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270. I'm Steve Black along with Jason Spees from Crude Life. You can catch Jason as part of This Week in Energy and the Crude Life segment each week, every Sunday morning, 10 a.m. right here on Super Talk 1270. All right, Jason, we're talking a little bit about the history leading up to where we are today in the state of North Dakota and going back to Ed Schaefer and how he grew a little bit of government because we were in a place where you had to build services in if you're going to try to keep and attract people to the state of North Dakota, because we were at that place where and our #1 export with all the commodities that we export was people. It was kids. How many friends of yours that grew up in a small town in North Dakota, they had no option. Everybody went to Minneapolis, or you wound up moving. If you came from a farm or a ranch, that operation couldn't support the 4 or 5 kids that were associated with that, or, the grandparents' parents, and then a next generation. Just didn't happen out. The financials weren't there in North Dakota because this was pre-Bakken oil boom. Under Governor Hoeven, you started to see some of the growth of government, and you're right. They started doing a lot of that in the education space. Look at the growth at UND, NDSU. That was a lot of the impetus. Well, it does go back to the 70s, but the history of the EERC, where they really
Let's take a pause here for a second, Steve, because I want just to put into context the gravity that we're talking about with people, because we're for this example, I'm going to just use University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Okay. Now, this is happening at NDSU and other universities in North Dakota through ag, energy, other things. But the example I'm going to give you is through health and through UCLA. And it was a gentleman in Seattle, Washington, who had a very rare liver disease. And so he got referred down to UCLA, and he was traveling back and forth. He'd go down there once a month, and they do all these expensive tests. And this was probably 30 years ago. This is the time when Hoeven was in, office, was the governor, that type of thing. It was when the universities, Bayh-Dole Act, maybe it might have been called, or something like that. It's there's some act that was passed where basically universities could go into the private sector and compete in the research world. Okay. And so this guy from Seattle, on his own dime, because remember, healthcare wasn't very good back then. And of course, if you're a university or a nonprofit, you're the one that needs help all the time. And so he's paying his own expenses, going from Seattle down to Los Angeles once a month and paying for some of the medical and all these different things. And so finally, after a while, he just kind of asks, are you guys profiting off this at all? Well, it turns out UCLA was taking this guy's DNA and selling it to pharmaceutical companies. So the university was profiting off of this guy's disease. And so there's real issue here. Because when you start talking about GMO crops and you start talking about enhanced oil recovery, you start talking about ERC projects and other things, this is real money. I mean, millions and billions and trillions of dollars. And there's a very select small group of people that have access to that. And that's it. And Senator Hoeven's a part of that. He's a big part of that. So what happened when Dalrymple came in? Well, go look what happened to the Bank of North Dakota. Dalrymple completely changed the Bank of North Dakota, Steve. I always joke and say what Dalrymple did to North Dakota, he basically tried to create a mini Federal Reserve. And so that way they can become a little mini Federal Reserve and figure out ways to profit off of it, because you can't even really get a bank account at the Bank of North Dakota anymore. If you do, you have to go to the bank for deposits. You can't do any online banking. Bank of North Dakota basically tries to bank with cities and giant organizations and things like that. So the bank is no longer for the people. It is in a roundabout sort of way. It's kind of in a sick, twisted way, in a very one-sided, narcissistic. If we twist it this way, it's for the people, but not how it was originally intended. So Dalrymple changed the state incredibly too. And because of what Dalrymple did, it really helped usher in the toxic nonprofits and the nonprofit private partner, public-private partnerships too. And Burgum really accelerated that through commerce, because what happened was there's this big movement for entrepreneurs because of shows like Shark Tank and things like that. So all of a sudden, commerce starts playing kingmaker. They start playing venture capitalists. And it was a mad dash between Burgum and Hoeven, and Burgum won that race. And, you know how you've heard the same rumors I have, that somewhere down the line, Burgum's people and Hoeven's people sat down in a room and split the state up. And as long as they don't cross paths, they play nice in the sandbox. So anyway, that's my soapbox moment right there, Steve.
Well, okay, so I want to go back and spool in, so Dalrymple, the lever was the Bank of North Dakota. And you got to remember where Governor Hoeven came from was the Bank of North Dakota. He's a banker by trade. Now,
Yep.
Fast forward to the Commerce Department doling out all of these tax dollars to every fly-by-night operation, whether it's the crypto mining data mining up in Williams County that has been a headache. And by the way, everybody who has their rates increase on their electric bill in the central and western part of the state, yeah, thank you. That's why, because there's not enough capacity for residents of North Dakota. So rates have gone up with MDU, and we're going to see more and more of that, by the way. But the lever for Burgum was the legislators who facilitated opening up the legacy fund. And I'll go back to 2014, 2015, when I started hearing, because the way the language was written, I started hearing every cockamamie idea from both Democrats and Republicans of everybody had a plan on how to spend the legacy fund. There's too much money there. We need to spend the legacy fund. And everybody came up with a scheme to get their hands on it. Burgum did it with the complicity of some local legislators, Rich Wardner and Dickinson, Mike Nathy in Bismarck, one of the architects behind cracking the bank, the piggy bank. And where did most of that money go? Fargo. I mean, plain and simple, a lot of it goes to Fargo. But that was the lever for Burgum to grow commerce. And now, besides commerce, which is doling out the money like a bank, you've also got the health department, DHS, which is a third of all budgets in North Dakota. That when you're looking at the budget for the state of North Dakota, a third is DHS. Where did all these social services come from? Because we didn't need them in the past. So why are we building a state of a welfare state? Basically what we're doing, we're building a welfare state. Who's paying for that? I am. Taxpayers are. But who's getting the benefit? So now you've got a double-edged sword with the three-sided legacy fund, DHS, Commerce Department, and now that joke I used to make about the growth of government, it's not a joke anymore. Look how many people are working for the state employees. That's scary. That's not sustainable, Jason, from an economic perspective.
No, and really all Burgum knows is the tech industry, which needs a surge of money every 3 to 5 years. And when you take a look at everything they've done, that's what they do. They need money every 3 to 5 years. Otherwise, they go away. And that's a very dangerous economy, because when you get your new round of funding, you think you've succeeded when all you've really done is put bubble gum in the dam, because you forget why you needed funding. You needed funding because your idea wasn't good in the marketplace. That's why you need funding, because it didn't work.
All right, we're up against a break right now, and I want to come back because I do want to tie this back up with commerce after the break. This is Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Bach along with Jason Spiess. You can catch Jason Sunday mornings with This Week in Energy right here on Super Talk 1270.
Talk of the Town. Talk of the Town. Weekday mornings starting at 9 on Super Talk 1270 and the free Super Talk 1270 mobile app.
KLXX Mandan Bismarck, a Town Square media station, broadcasting from the View Community Credit Union Studio.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
Talk lineup is on Super Talk 1270. Check out the program schedule at supertalk1270.com and on the free Super Talk 1270 app.
Portions of the following program are pre-recorded.
Welcome back to Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270. I'm Steve Bach along with Jason Spiess. You can get Jason with This Week in Energy Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. right here on Super Talk 1270. Jason, of course, my co-host on Wattage Wednesday. We're kind of circling back and running through this whole carbon sequestration, Summit Carbon Solutions, of course, Friends of Ag and Energy, their closed door meetings to educate legislators, to educate their constituents on the joys and wonderment of carbon sequestration and how you as a landowner really shouldn't be concerned or have fault with the fact that you're being eminent domain for a project, a private project that's going to make somebody else a bunch of money. But Commerce Department. And I want to go into the Commerce Department because I think it's got a lot of impetus in what's going on in the state right now, and then what could happen with the next part of the Burgum secession plan. We talked about the Hovind secession plan, and behind closed doors, there's those that will tell you that, the government of North Dakota has been laid out for the next 30 years. Everything was drawn out. Well, Burgum's got his own. And when you take a look at what's going on with commerce and all the money that they're spending, our tax dollars, and now you've got a lieutenant governor who usually is in line to be the governor, with Tammy Miller, that's coming out of that I'm trying to think of kind words to say, and I'm failing here, but coming out of that toxic pool of commerce, it doesn't bode well for the future of North Dakota. Where are we in 20 years? It's a scary place, Jason.
It is. It is. I mean, in the last segment, what you were talking about is a banana republic. You're talking about Burgum's Banana Republic, where it's basically a feast or famine. If you're connected with the state, you make good money. But then there's everybody else. You can call them serfs or whatever you want to call them. But that's what's happening. That's what's happening. And Burgum, he doesn't care. I mean, he hasn't cared about North Dakota 1 second he's been in office. And and I can prove it to you, Steve. Go do an open record search on every single time that the flag has been at half-mast and count how many times that flag has been half-mast for North Dakota citizens and how many times for out-of-state citizens. And then every time it is for someone in North Dakota, are they a public official or are they a taxpayer? I can't think of one time that Burgum has lowered the flag for a regular person. But somebody out of state, you bet he'll order everybody to go do it. And that's just one of many examples. Commerce is a great example. I can't think of any department more corrupt in the state of North Dakota than Commerce. In fact, there's a reason that they have the nickname Department of Discrimination, because they're extremely discriminatory. They discriminate against people of all kinds of different walks of life. And if you're not part of a certain group, then they won't give you the time of day. So they're like a little catty high school over there, like junior high. You know, Tim Schmidt and Teague and Josh Teagan over there, a couple of high school kids picking on people, feeling fun, feeling cool, feeling like they're doing the right thing when they're causing problems. They're causing bankruptcies. They're competing out in the private sector, and it's fun for them. They think it's a good time, and that's unfortunate because there was a time probably when Commerce did some good, but I've said it before. I guarantee you, Commerce and their unethical behavior is going to be a talking point during the 2024 election coming up. I guarantee it.
Now the question is on what level, because of Burgum's ties or attempted ties into the Trump administration, it brings up some interesting ethic questions on what's going on in North Dakota versus what's going on the bigger stage. Because is what's going on in North Dakota becoming the norm in government in other places?
Yeah, I think so. It's a quid pro quo now. It happened with the sexual harassment laws, and it's happened in a lot of other areas too. But quite honestly, most of the politicians are business development representatives for corporations, and they have the advantage of insider trading. People like Senator Hoeven, like I've said before, I don't think Senator Hoeven has ever had a bad year financially. I don't think he ever has. And that is unbelievable to bat 100% in any walk of life. So when you can vote on things and profit in the stock market, like a lot of these politicians are doing, well, now there are people that, these kids have made apps. So you can go buy the same stock that Senator Hoeven buys. So that way that you can profit too. And there used to be a time when someone like Drew Wrigley would hold somebody accountable for the amount of conflict of interest. But now, like I said, you can go get an app so you can do insider trading like Congress. And that used to be a big no-no. But now it's normal. And you and I and many others in the state, we still have a little bit of like that old world ethics. Doug Burgum doesn't. That's why when Doug Burgum runs for president, he doesn't mention God, because to him, God is not important. He does not pull his values from the same place that you or I pull our values from. Now, when a traditional Republican would talk about a Christian background, that is so that you know where he pulls his values from. So he believes in the 10 Commandments. Who knows what Doug Burgum believes in? He'll lie right to your face and not blink. Steve, it takes a special person to look you in the eyes and lie to your face knowingly and just move ahead with life. But that's the type of person that Doug Burgum and his wife and Senator Hoeven and his wife are. They'll look you in the eyes and lie. They don't have any problem doing that. And as long as they keep getting elected, you're going to keep getting the same stuff, Steve. That's all.
So when you're looking at the microcosm of Washington swamp and what that looks like across the country, When you hear the term swamp, I kind of think of it in terms of there's a lot of tributaries that feed that swamp.
Well, Burgum didn't clean the swamp. He built another one.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well,
he just built one right next to Hovens. That's all he did.
And our governor is a globalist. And so you've got some other factions at work here as well. And that's a different agenda for a different time. But looking forward to a great interview coming up. Jason, always a pleasure, my friend. We can catch This Week in Energy coming up Sunday morning right here on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Welcome back to Super Talk 1270 Stock of the Town. My name is Jason Spiess, sitting in here for Steve Walken as we go into the home stretch. 3 segments left, folks. We're going to head over to the Zoom line. Jared Walker is patiently waiting. He is the director of project development for Carbon Vert and has actually completed on-site carbon sequestrations. Jared Walker is one of the most prominent carbon management professionals in the world. He worked on it back at Barrow Island in Australia 20 years ago. He's been doing carbon capture projects. Let's head over to the Zoom line. Jared Walker with Carbon Vert on the line with us. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing well, thank you.
So let's talk about the carbon management business. It's kind of interesting because I'm not sure how you refer to it, given your, background where you've been very immersed in it. And it's interesting from the 5,000-foot view. I've been calling it the carbon management business for a couple of years. And I just saw a press release for Oxy, formerly Occidental, and Occidental Petroleum is now kind of being known as a carbon management company. So anyway, how are you doing? How long have you been in the carbon management business? And do you call it the carbon management business, I guess?
Yeah, we call it many things. CCS business, carbon management, it works just fine. I think that entails a lot of what we do. So that surely makes sense. I've been in the carbon world in some form or fashion for 2 decades now. My first project at a very small pace was in 2003 in Australia. I was part of the Barrow Island LNG plant project there.
Did you say the Barrow Island?
Barrow Island, Barrow. Yeah, it's an island off the coast of Australia where they have a LNG plant, and they are currently sequestering their CO2 from that LNG plant.
Okay.
In the early stages, I was part of the characterization team who went out there and helped them drill their characterization well when I was with Schlumberger.
Jared Walker is our guest, 20 years in the carbon management, carbon world business, if you will. Currently, he's with Carbon Vert. What is Carbon Vert?
What we are is a project development team. So I've now gone full cycle in my career from a consultant in the carbon world to being an owner's engineer, being the owner of the carbon site in my previous role. And now I'm in a project development role where Carbon Vert, we go out and find people who have CO2 that they just don't know what to do with, or they're in a place where they can't store it or do something with it where they're at. And we try and take those and pull them together and get them to a place where they can be stored and they can take advantage of the 45Q credits and the other economic value that's out there for their carbon. And we help take care of all of it from there down. So that's our role right now.
I have a very basic naivete question, and it might be so basic, I don't know if you can answer it. But when I look at the world of carbon, there's LNG carbon, there is biomass carbon, there's oil carbon, there's coal carbon, there's ethanol carbon. There's all kinds of different, carbon, it's a building block of life, if you will. And so because it's so vast and because there's so many different emitters of it, how is it that either you or the government or companies can zero in on different forms of it and try to sequester it, capture it, et cetera, et cetera. It just seems so much like the Wild West out there. You've been around 20 years. How is it being corralled?
It is, and technically it's not anything new. So CO2 has been either coming out of the ground in oil and gas, or has been separated off to be used to get more oil and gas out of the ground for decades, since the 70s. So the separation of CO2 from an LNG plant, from a natural gas stream, that's known. That's been done for a long time now. Separating it from other sources, it depends on the source. So things like you're talking about, ethanol and ammonia, they give off a pure stream of CO2. That's easy. You just grab it, pull the water out of it, and it's ready to go in the ground. Compress it up to supercritical. Other ones, like you say, like LNG plants, they're okay. They go through their refinement process. They get a fairly clean stream also. And then you have your hard ones, your power plants, and then you're coming down to less than 20% CO2 in that stream that comes out their stack. Sometimes down as low as 5%. That gets a little tougher to grab that CO2 and do something with it. But at the end of the day, once you can separate it out of wherever it's at, out of the stream, dealing with it from that point forward is all pretty much the same game. So.
You had a background in CO2 with ethanol, correct?
Correct. Yeah, my previous position was with an ethanol plant. And
there was some carbon storage, and I believe was it on site, if my memory serves me correct?
That's correct. So that project at Marquis Energy, they are doing a full on-site. They own a lot of acreage, so they own the pore space where they're going to store the CO2. The CO2 comes off a very pure form off of their fermenters to make that ethanol from corn. And so, yeah, that was pretty easy. We just grabbed the ethanol, grab the CO2 off the ethanol process, compress it. It'll go through a dehydration unit where we take out the water, and then the CO2 just goes right down to the ground, and we monitor it right there on site. So they have a lot of room there to store a lot of CO2.
So ethanol plants, my understanding is they're either storing it on site or they're trying to build a pipeline to move it across to different areas into storage cavities, if you will. Have you done anything on that side of it?
I know a lot about it. I have not been involved in those projects. Well,
there's not many.
There's three main pipelines. One's already disappeared. So there were three main pipelines.
Oh,
there's down to maybe one. Summit's probably the only one that's really still moving forward at any pace. But yeah, so there are areas in the country where you don't have the correct geology. You don't have the right rocks to store CO2 in. You're just sitting on top of granite, and there's no way to store CO2 there. And so you have to move the CO2 from the sources to where you can store it in the ground safely and securely. And that's what they're trying to do with those projects.
Mm-hmm. So if you're entering into new realms, into the carbon management world, you mentioned your background most recently was the ethanol, and grabbing it is a relatively easy process. You have a background in LNG, made a comment that was a little bit more difficult and compared to ethanol. How about like coal and oil? What's it like for carbon management, carbon storage in those industries? They've been under regulatory attack, and it seems to be very carbon driven. What's the opportunities? What's the reality there?
That's a good point. Yeah, as I was mentioning, those are we call them low concentration sources, right? They have a low concentration of CO2 in their effluent gas coming out their stacks, along mixed with a lot of other things that they're trying to take care of. So to separate that out, you can imagine if you have a lot of CO2, it's easy to grab it because it's right there, easy to filter. When you're looking at a lot of gas coming out with just a small percentage of CO2, you have to filter that through a process with amines and other. There's new technologies coming out every day. They're trying to help do this more efficiently. But the fact that you have to move so much gas and use so much energy to pull out that little bit of CO2, it's really hard to make those under current regulations and the price of carbon where it's at today. It makes those difficult unless you can really get a lot of volumes going down and get a really good project close by.
Mr. Jared Walker, going to ask you to hold that thought for just a moment or two. Jared Walker's our guest. CarbonVert, the company he works for, carbon management, the topic we're talking about. My name is Jason Spees, sitting in for Steve Bakken here on Super Talk 1270's Talk of the Town.
People.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
To Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Welcome back to Super Talk 1270's Talk of the Town. My name is Jason Spee, sitting in for Steve Bakken as we get into the home stretch here. Jared Walker with Carbon Vert is our special guest. Let's head right back to the interview. What do you attribute the rapid rise of the carbon management industry that's been around for a long time? There were, a lot of subsidies, and whether it went towards solar or wind or some of the other renewable classifications of energy. There's been a lot of, government assistance and resources put in the last 30, 40 years. The last 2 years, it's a totally different ball game. What do you attribute the rapid rise of this carbon management industry to?
Well, I think it's 100% the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. When they moved that needle up from $50 a ton to $85 a ton for pure storage of CO2, that crossed the barrier for a lot of industries. Before the $50 a ton, you probably got ammonia and ethanol were the only ones who could do it and still make not lose money doing it at that rate. Now 85, you're now getting most of the other industries in. Direct air capture, that's a completely different ballgame. They're at 180, and that's still too low for them. They're just so expensive to do that filtering of pure air. But yeah, the $85 a ton move, that was the move that set off the industry. And like you said, there used to be a couple of us out there doing it, and now there's one at every corner. It seems like there's a lot of people out there with the carbon on their name. So,
what I find interesting about this whole movement and this rapid rise and everything is we've had a couple individuals that have gotten into the market, and I'd say they're relatively new, meaning their company is probably less than 5 years old. You've been in it for 20 years. You're a veteran in this industry. What they've said is that it's a difficult industry to crack because it's all driven from the government. And when you just said the Inflation Reduction Act is driving a lot of this, and then I'm thinking about how a lot of the public-private partnerships, or whether it be the Department of Energy, Carbon Management Division. I see Colorado now has a Carbon Management Division. It's actually lumped in with oil and gas. There seems to be some chatter, if not credence, to a lot of this industry is being ignited by the government in some form or another. What's your experience with those comments coming from some of the new businesses that are trying to crack in?
Sure. So as with any business you want to take off, you have to have a driver, right? A motivation. Before there was a small industrial need for CO2. There was the enhanced oil recovery market, which was quite small, and they got most of their CO2 from natural pools of CO2 under the ground. So it wasn't a big cost to them to pull it out. And then there was your food industry for dry ice and your pops and beers and carbonated beverages. But that is such a small percentage of the actual CO2 that's out there that market alone could not drive the capture of CO2 from all of these different sources. And so, yeah, the government did have to step in. It had to be a carrot or a stick. They've tried the stick in other instances, the SOX and NOx. They decided to try the carrot here. So they decided to give us a tax credit and give us some motivation that way to move this forward. And because of that, it's sparked a lot of interest because now people can make a little money with these tax credits that come back, and it can be a moneymaker for a lot of people. As I say, you have to be in the black to go green. So kind of the driver for anything.
Is there a stick coming? I mean, carrot and stick. What's the stick?
Well, California's done both, right? So California, of course, has done the carrot and stick. They put their stick out there first and said, you must reduce your carbon emissions. And they said, and here's our carbon market. And they have a completely separate market for that. They actually have a trading scheme where people can grab CO2 by the ton and sell it to someone else who needs it. And it's a bit of a mess. But But they do have the stick, they have the bottom, the threshold, and then they give you the perk on top if you can do it better.
So we're joined by Jared Walker with Carbon Vert, VERT, Carbon Vert. Who's your customer? Who are you trying to go after? What type of carbon management are you going to, because there's like niches now in carbon management. Like you said before, there was like a handful of companies probably that really understood it and did it. But now it's like a whole new industry's opened up. So, who's your customer and what's your area of expertise in the Carbon Vert world?
Yeah, so we go after most emitters, sources of CO2 who don't have a place to store it on site or nearby is really who we're going after. And the source itself doesn't matter as much to us because there's ways of separating the CO2 out of almost any of the processes now. In certain times, we will take on the separation and the compression ourselves. We'll take that, people will just say, hey, here's my stack where all my emissions are coming out. I'm going to turn it 90 degrees and send it over the fence to you and you take care of it. And we'll take care of that. Other times they'll compress it, clean it up, and send us pure CO2 over so we can take care of it from that point. We'll put it in a pipeline, take it off to our storage hubs. Right now, our current projects are offshore, just offshore in Louisiana and Texas. So that's a nice area to be in because there's a lot of the NIMBY, right? Not under my backyard type of mentality out there where everyone wants to do something nice, but just not near me. And so if we go offshore a little bit, we can get it under the ground where no one's nearby. We can still safely store it, monitor it, and it just makes it a nicer area for everyone. There's a lot of room out there too, a lot of room where no one's doing anything. So that's kind of our play. We take it and we get paid to store it and monitor it, transport it, and it's sometimes even compress and clean it up.
Not in my backyard. That was what was mentioned just yesterday in the North Dakota Energy Transmission meeting from one of the regulators. They felt that some of the objection for the pipeline that's going through North Dakota was NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Yep.
And that, of course, is that becomes a political statement and that sort of thing. But at the same time, there's a history with wind turbines. There's a history with coal. There's a history with anything that's going to take out your sunset and your sunrise and that sort of thing. So where I'm from on the east side of North Dakota, west side of Minnesota. NIMBY always came up with wind turbines. Didn't matter. And hog plants, that was another one, hog plants. Nobody wanted to be near a hog plant. So you're finding out that is starting to be the case in some of these carbon management projects, or is that mostly just some of the sources, if you will?
Well, you see it with the pipeline. They've already killed one pipeline. And the problem is that the whole NIMBY is the same way. If you don't see value for what's going on, especially when it comes to the government taking your land or enforcing themselves, which a lot of people do not care for, you have to see value there. You have to say this is for the greater good of everyone. And if you don't believe that's what's going on is for the greater good of everyone, then you're going to push back against it. And there will always be people who will make up safety concerns or other concerns where there probably isn't as big a risk as they would like you to think. And that stirs a lot of this up.
Jared Walker, hold that thought. One more segment to go here on Super Talk 1270's Talk of the Town with Steve Bakken. My name is Jason Spee, sitting in for Steve for one more segment. Jared Walker is our guest with Carbon Vert. You're listening to Super Talk 1270's Talk of the Town.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
1270.
Welcome back to Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Welcome back to Super Talk 1270's Talk of the Town. My name is Jason Spee, sitting in for Steve Bakken. One more segment. Let's go back to the interview with Jared Walker with Carbon Vert. carbon management, carbon sequestration, carbon storage on site at ethanol plants. Jared Walker is our guest. We'll go right back to the interview. Not in my backyard. That was what was mentioned just yesterday in the North Dakota Energy Transmission meeting from one of the regulators. They felt that some of the objection for the pipeline that's going through North Dakota was NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Yep.
And that, of course, is, that becomes a political statement and that sort of thing. But at the same time, there's a history with wind turbines. There's a history with coal. There's a history with, anything that's going to take out your sunset and your sunrise and then that sort of thing. So where I'm from on the east side of North Dakota, west side of Minnesota, NIMBY always came up with wind turbines. Didn't matter. And hog plants, that was another one, hog plants. Nobody wanted to be near a hog plant. So you're finding out that is starting to be the case in some of these carbon management projects, or is that mostly just some of the sources, if you will?
Well, you see it with the pipeline. They've already killed one pipeline. And the problem is that, the whole NIMBY is the same way. If you don't see value for what's going on, especially when it comes to the government taking your land or enforcing themselves, which a lot of people do not care for, you have to see value there. You have to say this is for the greater good of everyone. And if you don't believe that's what's going on is for the greater good of everyone, then, you're going to push back against it. And there will always be people who will make up safety concerns or other concerns where there probably isn't as big a risk as they would like you to think. And that stirs a lot of this up. So.
That's the one thing about the future. Nobody's wrong. Anybody can speculate and project and predict and have fear. But, it's how you choose to interpret the fear or the future is up to you. And so that's why sports shouting and political talk shows do so well. You're just talking about the future all the time. My favorite is, this is really noticeable during the NFL draft season, is when you listen to I call them sports shouting, the guys who just try to, I'm more right than you about whether Brett Favre is a better Packer or a better Viking, that type of guys.
Right, yeah.
And what's interesting is this during the draft time, and it's really accelerated since COVID because everybody and their cat has a podcast. In fact, Will Ferrell's most successful podcast is by Ron Burgundy, and he's not even a real person. So that just shows you how that world works. But these individuals who just research online and then they pass it off as fact, and they talk about how Bill Belichick's going to draft this person and Andy Reid's going to draft this person and Jim Harbaugh is going to draft this person and the Chicago Bears are going to draft this person. And then when they're wrong, they actually spend a week trying to spin it why Andy Reid was wrong and why the Chicago Bears were wrong. They get so caught up and invested in their own spin and their speculation that they don't understand the reality. And so a lot of that I do believe is carbon related because there are some issues down in, Startel? What's the name of that town in Mississippi where they had an incident?
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the town, but I know the incident you're talking about.
Yeah, I always say Sartell, but that's a suburb out of Minneapolis, and that's my cousins live there, so I get mixed up. And then there's Sulphur, Louisiana. They just had a carbon leak as well. You do things on site. Have you? Is that a preferred method? Is that? I know there needs to be a certain geology underneath. Talk to me a little bit about how you have to have a couple things lined up in order to do what you're doing. Because isn't that right? You're doing on site, and the geology needs to be okay underneath.
That's correct. So the on-site, as my previous project, the on-site geology has to be right. So there's a couple things you have to look at. Number one, you have to be deep enough that the CO2 stays in a supercritical form. You take CO2 in an air form, it's in the air, and it's about 1 ton, about the size of a swimming pool, Olympic-sized swimming pool. You compress it down to that liquid phase, that fluid phase, and it's about the size of a bathtub. So your space savings is tremendous just to compress it up there. So you have to have something deep enough that the pressure in the earth is above 1,200 psi. That's usually about 2,600 feet in the ground. The other thing you have to have is a rock that'll accept it. So a sandstone. You go to the beach, you pick up some sand, you can dump water and it runs through. Same thing happens on the earth. There's sand down there. You can push CO2 and it just sort of flows into it. And then above that, you've got to have a rock that's going to hold it in place. So that's your seal. And that's usually a shale, clay-bound thing. It's like, all your plates that are fired clay, they're meant to hold water and hold fluids. So the same thing. You have a great big piece of sandstone, and above it you have a piece of clay that holds it in place, and then that allows that CO2 to go in there and percolate into that sandstone and stay there indefinitely.
Has there ever been a spill, a leak? Has there ever been a leak on site? In my mind, when I was a kid, I remember there was a theory with the dinosaurs where there would be certain, burps or cracks in the earth where some CO2 would come out, and then the dinosaurs would walk along and all, they would just collapse and right there on the spot. You're talking 2,500 feet down in the Earth's surface and that sort of thing. That would take like an earthquake or a sinkhole that you didn't know about underneath the deal. So has there ever been like an incident where, it's cracked up and I call it a carbon burp. Has there ever been a carbon burp on these on-site places?
Oh, not on the on-site places that we've done. There are very few out there actually doing this right now, correct? So there's not, but the technical work that has to go in before you put a project in is immense. The EPA and these class 6 wells, the type of well you need to inject CO2. You have to do seismic studies to make sure there's no faults in the area. You have to make sure there's no old wells that might be paths to come up. You have to make sure there's no fracture zones. You just have to really do some real homework before they'll give you the okay to store CO2. So that's why it hasn't happened. Now, in the past, okay, you talk about the Mississippi, that was actually a pipeline. That was a landslide where, Earth actually moved and broke it. So that wasn't really the pipeline's fault. But there have been times in West Texas, they do a lot of EOR, enhanced oil recovery, where they're pushing CO2 in to get more oil out of the ground. And, sometimes those guys don't do the same type of wells that we're talking about doing in our projects. And there has been times when CO2 will come up not through the well, not through cracks in the earth or anything, but just through the wells. And they'll have to go out there and stop it and go in there and plug it off some cement, and it's all good. They can fix those fairly easily. So that's the only real, leak problems you've ever really had in the industry.
All right, Jared Walker, Carbon Vert. Hey, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Folks, that's going to do it for Super Talk 1270's Talk of the Town. My name is Jason Spees. Thank you very much for listening. Sitting in for Steve Bakken. He's back tomorrow here on Super Talk 1270's Talk of the Town.
Talk of the Town.
Welcome to the School for Startups Minute with Jim Beach.
The Toastmasters organization is a great place to go and practice giving speeches in front of people. I highly encourage all of you to do that, especially if you want to focus on this week's topic of learning to communicate better. In just a second, I'll share today's piece of advice.
This is Dr. Michael Garko for Strauss Naturals. The heart is only a bit larger than a fist. Each day it pumps about 2,000 gallons of blood through 60,000 miles of blood vessels. With this extraordinary workload, I encourage you to take Strauss Heart Drops to help support a healthy cardiovascular system. The Heart Drops are backed by 100% satisfaction guarantee, no questions asked. Visit StraussNaturals.com to learn more and order the Heart Drops today.
Yesterday, I suggested smiling more and that you could even hear someone smile over the telephone. Today, I want to talk about another important aspect of communication, nonverbal cues. We all give off and receive tens of thousands of nonverbal cues every day. The way we dress, the way we comb our hair, what we do with our hands, the way we stand. All of these are critical to the way we are seen and perceived. You want to be perceived well? Think about the way you're standing.
We know times are tough. Inflation got you down? Well, we have your $30,000 inflation salvation. You could win up to $30,000 to help you through these hard times. Or be a daily winner of $100. Listen weekdays for code words between 8:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. Enter the words you hear into the free Super Talk 1270 mobile app for your chance to win. You have up to 10 chances per day to win up to $30,000. Your $30K inflation salvation is here.
Powered by 3B Meats. your neighborhood butcher shop with a modern twist.
On Super Talk 1270 and the free Super Talk 1270 mobile app.
Talk of the Town. Weekday mornings starting at 9 on Super Talk 1270 and the free Super Talk 1270 mobile app.
KLXX Mandan, Bismarck, a Town Square media station, broadcasting from the View Community Credit Union studio.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.